I'm Carol Daynard, and I'm on the committee that it helps to develop the program for picking from our garden. And it features people from our congregation and gives them an opportunity to show all the interesting things that they do. And I found it fascinating. And I was delighted when Jennifer agreed today to do this today. I had the good fortune of showing one of Jennifer's pictures in an art exhibit at the no longer Harriet Tubman Gallery. It was part of an exhibit for Violence Transformed. And I have the good fortune of having the book that she produced for I think the stories, the pictures, the whole exhibit was wonderful.
Goodness.
And she contributed, a point of view that can be seen both visually as well as in the stories. And so today, she's going to share some of this with us, as well as some of the pictures, I think, from her Uganda trip. And let's see what Jennifer has to share with us. Thank you, Jennifer. We feel very privileged to have you today.
Well, I feel very privileged. And many of my social work colleagues are here. Several of Central Reform Temple folks are here. People who are old friends from Lexington are here. Many parts of my life are here. Family is here. Fellow photographer is here. And so I'm delighted to be doing this. And so I will start by telling you how I even got into this. I was what's called a visiting scholar at the Brandeis Women's Studies Research Center, and that was around 2010. And I was there for 3 years, and I wanted to come up with a focus that was new, that took into consideration both my interests in photography and my interest in social work. And so I began, and I've always been concerned as a social worker in marginalized, invisible communities. And so I thought where I live, which is in the South End, Bob and I have a connection with what's now called HEARTH. It used to be the Committee to End Elder Homelessness. And so I thought an elder focus makes a lot of sense. Elders, particularly poor elders, are often marginalized and invisible. And so my first attempt at this project was interviewing 2 elders who were about to be moved into permanent housing through this organization called HEARTH, and to both interview them and take photographs of them. And the focus was not on what their pathology was or why they were homeless. Throughout my projects, I've been more concerned about what I describe as appreciative inquiries. That term came out of business many years ago, maybe in the 1980s, and it was used in business, especially in organizational development, as a way of appreciating employees and making the most out of that appreciation by taking their strengths and making it into an opportunity for them to do well with their strengths, rather than focusing on what they did not do well and focusing on improving their deficits or their weaknesses or their shortcomings. And I very much wanted to take that perspective in what I did with the people that I met with. That's not to say that people, after they got to know me, didn't start telling me other things about their lives that was more than I was there for. But my perspective was to focus on their strengths, their courage, what they liked to do during the day, what they felt good about, what gave them meaning in their life. And that was my intent throughout this project. So I had the good fortune that summer of 2012 to hear about, I guess Beverly told me to get in touch or introduce me to Hugo Kamya. I wasn't aware of that, Beverly, but thank you for reminding me. And Hugo was leading a trip mostly for students, although I had been a part-time adjunct faculty there, to go to Uganda. And I described it as both a study and a service trip because we were involved in giving breakfast to youth who spent their school time and during the week away from home. And I had the good fortune, and I'm moving on to that now, to meet as part of what I did in Uganda with AWOFs, and that stands for, with the sign that you can see, AIDS, Widows, Orphans, Family Support. Hugo is on my left, you can, or on my right if you're looking at the picture. And the other four people are employees. The woman in the middle in pink is Beatrice, and she is the executive director. Hugo, is she still there? Is Hugo? Oh,
yeah. Yes, she still is.
Okay. So this was a wonderful opportunity for me to use my camera and my interviewing skills and to meet with, I think it was 10 elders. Now, these are elders, miraculous women and men, mostly women, but a few good men who are the parents, if you will, grandparents who've become parents of their grandchildren because their children have died of AIDS. And it brought me into their homes in a way that has been transformative for me. And I'd like to share some of that with you. I had the good fortune to be driven around in a truck over bumpy roads, unpaved roads, by Thomas, who was dividing food for distribution among the families that we visited. And it was a wonderful opportunity to really get a feel of the land and of the villages in which these folks lived. Annette Nambawa, who is on your right, translated for me. So I can't be sure that everything that I heard and that she said was exactly what was said, but I'm taking her word for it. And I have created stories that are first person. In the middle, you see her grandmother, whose name is Josephine. And I'll start by, I had much longer interviews than what I condensed, but in order to be able to show them at Boston Public Libraries, eventually at Simmons, now Simmons University, I condensed to one page. Josephine, at that time, she was 72 years old. I was an only child. My father was an engineer and my mother had some education. I went to college for 3 years to study teaching and home economics. I taught for 12 years and then received a small retirement pension from the government. I decided to stay home to raise my children and grandchildren and to farm. Farming is very important. 9 grandchildren live with me and 3 others are away at school. I am so grateful for my children, grandchildren, and husband who takes care of me. I'm proud of doing small-scale farming behind my house. As long as I'm healthy, I will keep working in my garden where I get all my necessary food. I raise pigs, chickens, rabbits, and a cow. My parents were also farmers. I enjoy cooking, baking, and tailoring. I made the gomesi that I am now wearing. The women, and not just because I was coming, wear these beautiful long dresses that are handmade, and every single one of them was exquisite. At church, I collect items for orphans whom I visit at holiday times. I was happiest, because I asked her when she was happiest, when I celebrated my 50th wedding anniversary with my family and village friends who called me Good Grandy. I raised my children, both sons and daughters, to be examples in the community. Keep on working, don't be idle, and don't drink. I asked the question to almost everyone I interviewed, what would they like to tell their grandchildren as to what would make for a good life and for being healthy and happy as an older person like they were. And so you'll hear very different answers as we go along. So here we have Desrat. Desrat was 70 years old here, and I have several pictures to show of you. It is wonderful to see my mother alive at almost 100. She lives far away with no transportation. I see her once every 3 or 4 months. I'd like to visit her more often, but I can't leave my little grandchild. From my 5 children, I now have 8 grandchildren who live with me. My oldest, Rita, and you will see a picture of her, who is 16, came to live with me after her mother became sick with AIDS. Her father, who was my son, disappeared when Rita was 1 week old. I also lost a daughter to AIDS. Think about multiple losses. I don't compliment my grandchildren. This is a cultural value because I don't want to spoil them. We've heard this before, right? Yet they are special to me. My advice to my grandchildren is to listen and not to go to discos. I have 1 grandson studying to be a doctor. I don't know about Rita's future, although I treat them the same. I'm happy, and she wanted to make a point that she wasn't treating the boy different from the girl. Wonderful. I don't know about Rita's future, although I treat them the same. I'm happy my older grandchildren find work, have finished their studies, and do not come back to beg for money. How important it is to be self-sufficient. It is difficult for me financially. I rent one, and I'm going to show you this. Here's the group of grandchildren. And the one I wanted to show you here, these are rentals. This woman found a way to earn money by renting rooms, an extraordinary thing to do. I rent 1-room brick homes on my property, which I built after my husband died. There were 5, but 1 fell down in the rain. I no longer have time to dig. I have 1 pig left, losing many small pigs to diseases. By castrating my remaining pig, it grows faster so that I'll be able to sell it and then buy 2 in its place. And I wanted to include a picture of my sister who was also on this trip. It was at a time when she was still well and not ridden with disease, and she has since passed away. But that picture is at a time when she was fully functional. And so I wanted to share it with you. So I'm going on to Miriam's story. This is a beautiful woman, again, wearing a beautiful dress. Miriam has several grandchildren, takes care of neighbor children, and she has an intellectually challenged granddaughter who is on the ground. And she shared the fact that she left her with neighbors one weekend, and they fenced her in and treated her terribly. And she realized right then and there she could never leave her again because of that fear of how she had been mistreated. This woman, again, is very independent. She uses her cow to get milk from, and it's her one cow that she uses for sustenance of her family and to sell. She also, if you can believe it, makes the bricks behind her. So these bricks that you see there are her own doing, and there they are drying. So I would like to now share Kiwanuko's story. As you can see, he's wearing a soccer shirt, and I'll tell you a little bit about that as we go along. I grew up in a small Ugandan village. I've been happily married to Nakakande for 49 years. She's 25 years younger than I am. We have 5 children who are still alive. You know, because there have been so many deaths, they make a point of saying that they're still alive. My son's daughter, Mayumba, 18 years old, has lived with us since 14 in order to help us with washing, getting grass for pigs, milking cows, and planting. After going to college, I taught mathematics, science, history, Luganda, which is the native language, although most people speak English, and a little English at the primary school level. I was headmaster in 1966, and some students became ministers and bishops that he's very proud about. I retired in 2002. I received a small government pension and support from my children. After taking naps and having a cup of tea, I tend to a few banana trees and dig in my garden. Very important for most families. On Sundays, I go to church with my family. I'm referred to as coach. I have coached since 1954 and played until I was 79 years old. He, in this picture, is 89. And I don't know whether he's still alive because 2012 was 10 years ago. Hugo, do you have contact with any of the people that I have mentioned?
Yes, I do have contact with Beatrice and Vincent, who works with Vincent, not any of the
Families.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because he'd be 99 now. So, you know, one wonders. Yeah. I now organize and coach a village team. At 89 years old, he was coaching a village team. I get pleasure from teaching young people to play the sport. I would like my children to be teachers. They need to be good citizens. Education is a must. Treat your children well and never abuse your spouse. This is what I didn't ask them questions like this, but he was very intent on telling me what the advice he would offer his grandchildren. Talk with your spouse, and not just grandchildren, but to have a good marriage. She and I have never hurt each other, and she has never left me and returned to her parents. which can happen quite often. And in fact, one of the women that I met did have that happen. Here we have him with his wife and his pig. So I'm going to tell you about Joyce. Here we have Joyce. She knew that I was coming, and she wanted to make the entryway dust free for me. So here she is, this 100-year-old woman who cannot stand up, who's making it a point of dusting her front way. Just it brings tears to my eyes. I'm close to 100 years old, but I don't know my exact age or date of birth. I live with one great grandchild who is the daughter of my grandson. All my relatives are gone except for one son who wants to move me out of my home and to get rid of my land. Naomi is a woman with a beauty parlor across the street whom I did meet. And she looks in on me every day, making sure that I have food and am not sick. My few neighbors in the village also come by and cook for me. There is no one to wash my clothes because they want money to do that. My grandson, who visits his daughter and me only once every 3 years, takes me to the hospital to buy medications. I mix sugar with my malaria medication, and I often get my medication mixed up. I live with my 6-year-old great-grandchild, whom I'm going to show you now. She takes care of me and sleeps with me so that I'm not alone. All my relatives are gone except one son. I lost my memory and get confused. So it's hard to know who people are unless they visit often. Are you my sponsor? It's part of her being confused and wondering if I'd been there before. I don't know you, but thank you for bringing me sugar for my tea, rice, and soap. So I was very struck by the mutuality of caring, even with this 100-year-old woman and her great-grandchild who's 6 years old. Here, this is where she cooks her food. Muganga's story. So Muganga, again, as you can see, he's got bananas in the background and very much is a farmer. I'm alone with no real assistance. My one son who looked after me died of AIDS in 2002, and I'm responsible for his children. Their mother is HIV infected and not well enough to take care of them. I also had a daughter who died of AIDS in 2005, but her children are taken care of by her husband's family. My wife, who lives nearby, and another woman take care of me. I gave up some land to pay for a roof, but the contractor ran off with my money before finishing. If I put in windows and doors, my grandchildren could make some money by renting the house. I have a few coffee trees used for selling coffee in order to buy sugar. It's not a lot of work using a hoe, which I do every morning before prayers. I don't have the strength that I had. I've had many bouts of malaria. I now go to the hospital for pills on my motorcycle. I used to own a car. Now, mind you, this man is 85 years old, and he uses a motorcycle to get to the clinic. I used to own a car, but it was too expensive to keep. When I was younger, I biked to and from work. I worked at Makerere University, which is the top university in Kampala, as a physics lab assistant from 1952 to 1994. My days were long. I learned some English. My father could not afford education for me, so I only went to primary school. My father lived to 75. He told me that I was very bright and could do anything. I'm confident and try my best. I do projects on my own, but I do mingle with people on Sunday at church. So, and here he has buried family members on his own land, and it's very important for him to be close to them. And this I thought was also quite interesting. In order to save water from infrequent rainstorms, except certain times of the year, he collects the water off the roof and puts into this big can. And here we have Bob with him. Bob was a wonderful partner with me on these visits. So I'd like to talk, I'd like to ask you, from listening to these stories, seeing some of the pictures, what do you think is the resilience here? Or do you think it's survival? And I guess I'm gonna lead it in the direction of resilience. I remember when I was a visiting scholar at Brandeis, there were people there, one in particular, who said, this is just survival. This is not resilience. You know, this is what they have to do. And I felt very strongly that their lives showed resilience. And let me just give you a couple of definitions of resilience, and I'd like to hear what you think in terms of how they were resilient. So one definition might be a dynamic process of an adaptation to adversity. Another would be ability to cope and recover from stress, from crises. Third, rebounding from stress and returning to a balanced state of well-being as strong or stronger than before. And the last definition, if you think about it, is capacity to resist a sharp decline in functioning, though a person temporarily may appear to get worse. So if you believe that this is resilience, and I'm directing you in that way, how do you think these folks, men and women, grandparents, great-grandparents, showed resilience? Does anyone have a thought about that? Susan Seidel.
Yeah, thank you. You didn't give a definition of survival, because it really is both. I mean, to survive under harsh conditions is a form of resilience. So I wouldn't have it as or. But one thing I'm not sure, and first of all, I have to say these stories move me. And I think, Jennifer, they tell their own stories and you share it with great humility. And I think we can't honor people without telling their stories. So I'm very moved that you've done that. But I want to ask, did they talk at all about any kind of spirituality?
Oh,
did that
yes.
sustain them?
Yeah.
Huge. Most of the families, you know, you heard they're mentioning either praying at home or going to church, but faith is an enormous part of their lives. And in fact, you'll see soon after, I visited a child, a home of children taking care of their own younger siblings. Child-headed households is how they're referred to. And they have on their wall two proverbs from the Bible, and I will share them in a little bit, but definitely faith is an enormously important part of their lives.
And I think that contributes to resilience.
Yeah, no question. Phyllis.
Well, I agree with Susan about a few things. One was how beautifully you told these very moving stories. and let them speak, in a sense, their own truths without leading them. And I'm sure you commented, but the comments probably were like, tell me more. I do think also that resilience and survival go hand in hand. I mean, we want to survive, so it's sort of built into us. So we then are resilient and we adapt to what happens to us. And they all, nobody complained, at least in the excerpts you had, and nobody complained and said, oh, my life is so bad. And so I didn't hear any complaints. I heard kind of an acceptance of their life as it was. There also the pleasure that they got from grandchildren and from community, which is a reason to live and want to survive. I was interested in how many of them talked about grandchildren who took care of them. It was not just they taking care of their grandchildren, but the grandchildren provided comfort and also even more kind of cares, which you can see then generations of learning about, comfort and care to the older generation.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think they are very resilient. They also are very alive, even the very older ones, with multiple things interesting happening in their lives and taking care of their farms and their people and their lives. So I guess I would say that it does go, resilience and survival are really connected, hard to separate them entirely.
Good. Anybody else have a thought? I mean, I surely don't want to be Pollyannish. Their lives were very stressful, and counteracting the stress, though, is all the pleasures they got from what is, and living life in the present, and the meaning they got from being a grandparent, often called a Jaja Mama. Or I don't know, Hugo, if I've heard Jaja Papa, but I've sort of taken it upon myself to call the men that I saw Jaja Papas, but it's usually referred, Jaja Mama is usually what comes to
Right.
mind. Is that? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. What you hear most is Jaja Mama, and for people who are hearing this for the first time, it's or some people call it Mama Jaja, which is mother, grandmother. So it's that the women have taken on both the role of being mother, but at the same time, grandmother too. You do hear, I know that my father is called Jaja, before he died, he was being called Jaja Tata, which is the equivalent to Jaja Papa, but what they would use Tata, Jaja Tata, which is a grandfather, but it's not that common. I think just as everywhere in the world, women are more in the caretaking roles, so you will hear that happening a lot. You'll hear more Jaja Mamas as opposed to Jaja Tatas.
Yeah. Okay. I think so that we can give time to what I have since done, we're going to move on to Boston.
Can I just add a comment, Jen?
Yeah, that's Beverly. Yeah.
I was thinking when I was working with this group out of Mass General, we were going back and forth to Liberia. I'll show my face quickly. And there was a lot of concern. They wanted to develop a mental health program in Liberia for people with mental illnesses. And Liberia culture is like, we don't believe in that. There's no such thing. And, talking about spirituality, it's an act of God and the devil. And it took several years. They would not allow those concepts into that country. And they said, it's a very European notion. And we don't believe in that. And so, we worked with the UN there, a whole bunch of folks, people I knew from Ghana who moved to Liberia and stuff. And it took a long time. They finally did open up a mental hospital one. And that's, it's not really surviving. It's not that strong. And I was thinking about that in terms of the notion of resiliency and survival. And from a cultural perspective, are we applying European concepts and expecting that, this is the way people in Uganda live? And, is it resiliency? Is it survival? And what frame of reference are we using? That was a concern that sparked my mind when you mentioned that. So,
Well, I remember, Hugo, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that most of the places that we visited were set up by local Ugandans. They were not set up by missionaries or colonizers or people from the outside. That Bob and I were both very struck by the fact that the emphasis that you put on this trip was meeting the agencies that were founded by Ugandans.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's correct. And it continues to be the case. And even those that had been established by either expatriates or missionaries, there is now a sense of wanting to give this back to the locals and have the local people run these organizations. I actually, as a matter of fact, just came back from Uganda 2 weeks ago, and I noticed that there is even a more vibrancy around that kind of indigenous self-governance.
Yeah. Thank you. So
I don't think we should deny. I don't think we could deny the European influence, however it comes in. And the people at Mass General were not missionaries; they were PhD and MD psychiatrists. There were people of color that were colleagues of mine, and we can't dismiss that. In Uganda, even there's a lot of European influence.
Sure, of course,
values and stuff.
Absolutely.
And so how grandparents raise their children, how grandchildren take care of their grandparents, the generational stuff, it's more cultural, I think, than, it's a matter of survival or, resiliency. And we think about the cultural aspects of the role of the family and the importance of the family and what do each other mean, the offsprings,
and tradition.
And the sense of community is very strong in most third world developing countries, and it has been historically forever. So
rather than great. So I want to these child-headed households. These are the two proverbs: do good to them that hate you. I think that's so wonderful. And this one: God does not promise to solve all my problems, but God does promise to be with me always.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I was very taken by those two.
I have a question. Can I have a question, Jennifer?
Yeah.
One person alluded that you brought presents, and thank you for sugar. So I was interested in what you did bring. And was that typical? You brought sugar or rice?
Sugar and rice. I asked Thomas and Beatrice what they felt would be a good way of showing my respect and my thanks.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what they said. And so Thomas had these huge bags of both, and that was from what we offered to the AWOFs.
Mm-hmm.
And
Nice.
you got that idea from going to Ghana. When you went to Ghana, I talked about the importance of bringing gifts.
Well, I think I get that from my Jewish background too, Bev. Oh, I always bring gifts.
That was everybody had to bring some gifts.
Yeah. Jennifer, that family where you took Quotsa is one that we are still in contact with. I actually just got an email from one of them 2 days ago. So
the child-headed household. Really?
Yeah, we still continue to work with them.
And did they still have those saying on the? Yeah. So I want to move on to Boston now. Here we have a picture of one of the grandchildren being served, but it's with Deanna Forrest. Deanna was the director of what's called Connections as part of MSPCC, the Mass Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children. I think it doesn't use the whole name anymore. All you see is MSPCC. I think it's also now been subsumed by Elliott Services. So I don't think it's a freestanding organization. Am I right about that, Deanna?
MSPCC is a subdivision of Elliott Community Human Services,
Yeah.
Lexington.
So when I came home from Uganda and was very steeped in what I learned, I remember a friend saying to me, you go halfway around the world to be concerned about grandparents there who are taking care of their grandchildren. What about those that live right near you? And I had to think about it for a bit. And he was right. I mean, I think, of course, I'm interested in other people from around the world, but it's important to be concerned about people where you live as well. And so I then began researching how I can connect with a local organization that serves grandparents. One thing led to another. I was in touch with the Mass Commission for grandparents raising grandchildren. I don't, their official name I had written down, Commission on the Status of Grandparents Raising Grandchildren, which is a statewide commission. So the governor has really put some effort into making sure that this population gets served. And the Secretary of Elder Affairs somehow got me to connections. I think that's how I got to you, Deanna. Is that right? Or was it through the commission?
My memory, Jennifer, is that you contacted someone at Elder Affairs and they sent you to the city of Boston through a lot of local municipalities. There are councils on aging for Boston. Our council on aging is through City Hall. So they're now called the Age Strong Commission. So they're a department within City Hall.
Yeah.
So that's how we got connected.
Right. So Deanna, whom you see in this picture, and I had already been connected with them. Deanna and I made a connection, and she valued what I had in mind, which was similar to what I did in Uganda, interview, tell their the stories of these grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents. And this particular picture was taken when we drove around the city delivering Christmas presents to the grandchildren. Do you remember that, Deanna? I was in your car.
In my car, and well, and without compromising confidentiality, that little boy is, I think he's probably about 11 now, being raised by his great-great-grandmother.
Yeah. So here we have another picture of Deanna. And this is with Harriet Jackson Lyons, who really is the reason that the organization serving grandparents raising their grandchildren exists. In the 80s, when there was a lot of stigma about grandparents raising grandchildren in our area, she fought for grandparents having their rights taken into consideration and not to be thrown aside and have the children pushed into foster homes or taken over by the state. And she created what's called ROC, Raising Our Children's Children. And she was a remarkable woman who lived to the age of 93. I would like to read you her story in now what's been put together as a book, the stories of the grandparents and their grandchildren in the Boston area. I did have an opportunity before COVID, starting in 2015, to meet with 25 families. So I'd like to read you her story. I was born and raised in Boston, but my grandparents came from Virginia. My parents were very intelligent, and my mother was one of the first Black girls to graduate from girls' high school. I'm going to switch to her. I graduated from Roxbury Memorial High School. I had 6 children, and 5 are living. I have 12 grandchildren, 14 great-grandchildren, and 3 great-great-grandchildren. I raised a few of the grandchildren, and I have very friendly relationships with many of them. As descendants from slaves from all over Africa, we were punished or sold if we tried to form our own community. We came to this country as individuals, not as a collective, and had to build our own culture. We were misunderstood by others and had no jurisdiction over what happened to us. Historically, our babies were made to be sold, and we never had a chance to nurture our own. As nannies, we took care of white men's children. I was so privileged to feel that she could, as a middle-class white woman, to get to the point in a relationship with her was certainly not the case to begin with. I had to prove myself with this woman, and rightfully so. But for her to share this with me, I thought was an enormous privilege. My oldest daughter, Naomi, had a drug illness. When the state heard that Naomi's daughter, Charlene, was living with me, they threatened to take her and her older sister, Jamila, away from me. I went to Superior Court and was directed to a pro bono lawyer who advocated for me as a grandmother to obtain custody of my grandchildren. The judge's response was, "God bless grandmothers." I had an idea about groups for grandparents that Codman Square Community Health Center encouraged me to organize. We met wherever we were given free space. We brought in experts on housing, education, safety, and legal issues, which in fact is just what Deanna did as well, making it a point of informing and educating the grandparents so that they were in the best position to raise their grandchildren as fully as possible. I have profound feelings about raising our children's children, ROC, which I founded in 1993, I thought it was earlier, as a nonprofit organization. What we did became part of the gerontology curriculum at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. I traveled around the country promoting our program. I spoke at several conferences, including the Legal Defense Fund and Brandeis University. I first met Julia Martin, who's the next person I'm going to share with you, when ROC was about 10 years old. MSPCC and ROC eventually formed a collaboration. At that time, Julia was living at Bromley Heath Housing Development and was the Senior Director of Activities for the City of Boston. We liked each other immediately and have become like sisters. The ROC group met in an old building at Bromley Heath and was called the Bromley Heath Nannies, which we co-facilitated. When the Julia Martin House was built in 2006, the group moved there. Can you imagine? This woman you're going to meet next has a senior housing building named in her honor. ROC still exists, although MSPCC has taken over leading the groups and providing services to grandparents and other kin. With the increase in the size of the program, I do hope that the uniqueness of each neighbor group is maintained. This woman was very aware that neighborhoods differ, and so Connection has made it very important to have local organizations of support groups throughout the city. So there's one that's been in Jamaica Plain. There were two that were in Jamaica Plain because one of them was at the Julia Martin House, which is in JP, one in South Boston, one at Codman Square in Dorchester. One, help me out here, Deanna, what did I?
Library we started a group in about 2017 for working families. So
which is at Grove Hall, right?
Charlestown, South Boston, Jamaica Plain. As a party of one, we did what we could. COVID has sadly derailed some of the in-person work that MSPCC is doing with grandparents, but they trudge on.
Yeah, and I'll end with Harriet, that she's very proud of the fact that many of the children from the original grandparent groups are now college educated with good jobs. It would be great if they could put into writing what it meant to be raised by grandparents. So that's been a goal of Deanna's, somehow to get to the grandchildren and have them tell their stories, which would be wonderful to happen. Julia Martin is the woman she said was like her sister, and Wisdom Weavers became the title of my project with Deanna, and it was Deanna's idea of Wisdom Weavers, which I love because these are very wise grandparents who are weaving a past and a present and future that makes all the difference in the world for these grandchildren. And here we have Julia with Harriet. Julia is now 90, I think.
93 in July.
Oh boy. And Deanna and I just saw her a couple of months ago, and Harriet was 93 when she died. So here, Julia, here we have, can you imagine, because she was such a strong advocate for seniors and for people living at Bromley Heath Housing, they named a senior housing development in her honor, and here she is in her office.
She was very involved, Jennifer, in kind of the organizing around that and working with the Plain Neighborhood Development Corporation on design and building and thus programming for the folks that live there. They just celebrated their anniversary probably about 3 years ago.
So I'm just going to read a little from her. I didn't want to shirk what has been done in Boston because it's as beautiful as what's being done in Uganda, but in some ways different. But I would say, except for how they live and what they wear, I think there are probably more similarities in their humanity than there are differences, although certainly differences exist. Julia's saying, I was a state kid at age 12 when my mother left the family until age 18. I lived in several foster homes, but Mother Atkinson was my favorite. She said, you are somebody, which I have always told my children and my grandchildren and great-grandchildren, who now number 108. After I graduated high school, I went to the School of Nursing at Children's Hospital, met my husband, got married at 19, and had my first child at 20. At 28, when the West End was being demolished, I moved to Bromley Heath Housing, where I have been ever since. This Julia Martin House is on one end of Bromley Heath. We were the second Black family in a bad neighborhood. Now I have an extended family of people who care about my grandchildren, especially my great-grandchild, Daryl. Here he is. Now 13, who was born handicapped and has received much love from many neighbors. I believe that every day there's something you can do to help somebody. And that's how she has conducted her life. In order to just share a few more, I wanted to share Priscilla is a blind woman, has been blind since I would say birth. And she is very proud of being independent. She takes the subway on her own, and she manages independently very well. She is here with her daughter, her granddaughter, who was there when I visited her home, didn't want to be photographed. I am proud that I've been able to take care of all three of my children on my own. I have my own apartment and I'm very independent. I cannot see, but I do everything else and voice my opinion. I use buses and subways, and that's the reason my children learned early to take public transportation. People complained, but I couldn't leave them home alone, and as a result, they also became independent. Erica, 12, is my youngest child and lives with me in Dorchester. She also sees her father, who lives nearby. I also take care of Thalia, age 4, Jakia's daughter, who now lives with her mother. I used to take care of Jakia's older daughter, Tanya, who is now 9. When Jakia asked me to help with Thalia, of course I said yes, since no one was going to take away my grandchildren. Something that you hear repeatedly is what these grandparents will do to make sure that DCF, the Department of Children and Families, doesn't come in and take these children away from them. They're very proud and insistent on being recognized as the best influence for their grandchildren. State evaluators were surprised at how well I functioned as a parent, so they've left me alone. Now I have a good relationship with my daughters, even though it was rough when my oldest was young. Jakia now appreciates what I do for her. She says that I don't have a mean bone in my body. And you see her here when the first a part of this project, we had a celebration at Grove Hall Library honoring these parents. And at that point, there were about 14 of them who had come forward and said, yes, I want to be interviewed and I want you to take pictures of me and my grandchildren. And here she is reading her story in Braille. We made sure that it was translated in Braille so that she had an opportunity to read it. And she's there with her daughter and her significant other of many years. Okay. Here we have Deb and Steve. Raising our grandchildren is a mission for us, a very strong calling. There's no one else to pick up the pieces. We adopted 2 girls soon after birth. Our older daughter, Ariana, lived with us, and our other daughter, Zoe, lives in New Hampshire and is married with an infant. At age 21, Ariana wanted a baby with her boyfriend, later her husband, and they lived with us in our own apartment building in Brookline. We don't know that she was using and selling drugs, and she became addicted to them. She was hospitalized with postpartum depression after each child was born, had been in recovery programs several times, and in June 2014, she overdosed. Even though we have fixed income and health problems, we're determined to obtain guardianship of Ariana's children. Aiden now, and this was a few years ago, this was done in 2018. So 4 years, and certainly Deanna knows much more about what's going on with these families. I can say, though, that Steve did die only a few months after I had met with them in 2018, which is sad. I know that for a while, Deb was depressed, but somehow she kept coming to the support meetings and getting support from the other grandparents. So this, I'm talking to you about one moment in time, and things have changed a great deal for many of these families. We get many services for our children. Aiden and Chloe play well together and love each other dearly. We want them to grow up knowing that they matter, are important and good people without having to succumb to others just to fit in. Try your best, even if you're not always right. We have two sisters here who are very devoted to each other and devoted to their grandchildren. I met them in a Dunkin' Donuts next to a playground. And so here you see them at the playground with their grandchildren. It's wonderful bringing up our grandchildren, Cheryl says. I have 4 children, and I'm taking care of my 2-year-old great-grandson and my granddaughter who live with us, and my 4-year-old granddaughter after school who lives with her mom. Donna then says, I was cared for by my older sister, Cheryl, while our mothers were at work. I lived with Cheryl again when I first had my 2 children. Now I'm taking care of my daughters who are 10 and 6. Everyone loves Auntie Cheryl and Auntie Donna. We come from a tradition of strong women. New apartment buildings have been proposed where we lived to be named the Walker Park Apartments in honor of our mom. The Walkers have had a large family reunion for about 10 years, and our brother's wife put together an album that we cherish and that she showed me. We're now 5 generations, all the way down to 4 great-grandchildren. We always look out for each other, not just blood relatives, but people close to us. So this sense of community and strong family bonds is even when there's been they're single mothers, and there's this sense of, if you're part of our tribe, if you will, we will be there for you. But here we have Audrey, who takes care of children from her daughter, very devoted. She did have a husband, and he died in 2013. And after having been on dialysis, she is very committed, even though it's hard for her and she has physical difficulties herself. It's very important that she take care of her grandchildren and treats them very well. And it is also very involved in volunteer work because she feels a responsibility not only for her family, but for others who are less fortunate. I think maybe I'll end with Evelyn. I'm a survivor. After I retired in 2014, I was hit by a car, broke a leg after my knee replacement, and my granddaughter was temporarily cared for by her father. I refused to give up and fought to be well again. I don't just sit around. I take my 10-year-old granddaughter, Saretha, on 2 buses to where the camp bus meets her in the afternoon. I take my 3-year-old granddaughter with me to get her. I've taken care of Saretha since she was 3 months old. Her mother was in a car accident and was incarcerated for drugs. I pushed for custody since my son didn't have his life together, though he now sees her every day, works 2 shifts, and enjoys braiding her hair. Foster care was recommended, but I didn't want my grandchild living with strangers. I was a single parent when my husband and I separated and my twin kids were 9. My daughter Stephanie and her 3-year-old daughter temporarily live with me. Her 13-year-old daughter, Amari, lives with her father, but talks to her mother every week and sees her on weekends. Stephanie graduated high school, attended college for 1 year, and now works. I earned a computer after taking a computer class for grandparents that Connections had been responsible for setting up. A class for grandparents and grandchildren, which my granddaughter also uses. I want her to be a leader, not a follower. But for now, she should enjoy being a little girl. She never misses a day of school. If she eats, exercises, and sleeps well, she'll be a healthy adult. If she makes herself proud, I will be proud of her. What you're hearing over and over here, we have another pastor and his wife who took care of their grandchildren, and Juanita, who the cover of the book has this picture of her, a very devoted, for a while she was in a shelter, living with her grandchildren in a family shelter. Amazing. Here we have at Canopy Lake Park. I became sort of part of an extended family here for almost 5 years with these folks. And it was very sad for me when COVID hit and I no longer was able to see them. I have had the good fortune with Deanna to visit Julia, but things aren't the same since COVID and since Deanna retired. And hopefully at some point they'll get back on track, because these grandparents got a lot of benefit from the support they got from other grandparents in these support groups that met every other week. Here we have a last picture of Denise, who is here. You see her with her mother, with her daughter and grandchildren at what was then the Dudley Street Library, but now is, I guess, Nubian Square Library. And I just have 2 more pictures. That this is just one of the groups that we did not mention, Deanna, which is the Spanish-speaking group at Bromley Heath. I attended a meeting there where they were making jewelry. And they're right on the grounds of the housing development. And I want to close with this. This was another picture from this child-headed household. What matters most is how you see yourself. Take a good look. And what I really have learned from this project is that while I went to it thinking that I would be learning a great deal and benefiting from the learning that I benefited from, I really didn't fully appreciate how much they're being recognized both in photos and in stories has empowered them to feel a different way about themselves. I think that's very, very touching, that these grandparents often feeling either unrecognized or treated poorly or misunderstood, invisible, felt from this project that at long last they've been recognized, understood, have a voice, and are appreciated. And so for me, that meant most.
I want to thank you. It's always so moving to hear these stories and your insights and the whole discussion about resilience and survival. Really important, especially in these times, to think about.
I think we can learn a lot from people who have a lot to share and offer and have resourcefulness in ways that I'm not so sure I have. You know, it hasn't been tested to that degree. And so it leaves me questioning all the time, you know, how would I do? And I'm not sure if my answer would be as well as they do. Yeah.
Well, thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah.
This was
If
Thank
I-
you.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Jennifer.